We've looked at leads whose handwriting scored much, much higher than Patsy's on a comparison scale.
So if John and Patsy didn't write the note, well, then who did?
Linda Hoffman, who cleaned house for the Ramseys 3 days a week, still stands by them.
John and Patsy didn't have anything to do with killing that little girl. And if they did, if it's proven that they did, I'll never trust anybody the rest of my life, because I never seen anything but a loving, kind, wonderful family.
To name her as a suspect, but she always denied it.
I think about JonBenet every day of my life, and have ever since the day she died. I have never turned my porch light off. My porch light's been on every night since JonBenet died.
And one of the first suspects was the Ramsey's housekeeper.
The housekeeper, Linda Hoffman-Pugh, and her husband, Mervyn, were suspects from the beginning. In fact, number one, they were needing money. She had asked Patsy to borrow $2,000 shortly before Christmas.
Up next, like mother?
Miss West Virginia 1977, Patsy Paul Ramsey.
Like daughter. But when the daughter dies, the mother lives under a cloud of suspicion. So, what is the truth?
Number two, they had this familiarity with the house and with the people inside the house. They knew JonBenet.
As long as there is a killer at large who has murdered our child, our lives will never go on. I mean, that is just ridiculous.
Someone killed this 6-year-old child. We know that, and we want them captured.
It would have been possible for them to go to the house, take JonBenet without having a disturbance.
When police visited the Pughs, they discovered the same brand of duct tape that had been used to cover JonBenet's mouth.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Watch chalk, watch chaff. Are you able to separate the two? Could the housekeeper separate the wheat from the chaff, the chalk from the cheese?
There are a few who can.
And if you look at the very end of the ransom note, the very last lines, just look how familiar the ransom note writer is with the Ramseys. Don't try to grow a brain, John. What happened to Mr. Ramsey? You are not the only fat cat around. What had happened to Mr. Ramsey, and we respect your business? Don't underestimate us, John. What happened to Mr. Ramsey? Use that good southern common sense of yours, John. It's up to you now, John. And so what the ransom note is trying to suggest is that there's someone familiar with the Ramseys. And I think some people have been taken in by that. Whoever wrote the ransom note wants you to think it's an insider. And the most obvious insider is the housekeeper, after Patsy Ramsey. In her unpublished draft, Someone is Getting Away with Murder by Linda Hoffman-Pugh, she supposed that Patsy got some of the inspiration in terms of the events leading into the early morning of the day after Christmas from reading material inside the house. She would have been aware of that reading material. And she wrote, all of those Tom Clancy novels were suddenly flashing through your mind as JonBenet's body lay before you. What would a clever mystery writer have his antagonist do? But was that reading material from Patsy's side of the bed or John's? And who was reading Mindhunter? Coming back to Attaché and JonBenet, which we spoke about in the previous video, it's difficult not to imagine that Patsy developed some of her attachments, such as to the creme de la creme. Both those words have got little accents on both of the E's there. That Patsy developed some of her attachments to that pretentiousness which saturates the pages of The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Meanwhile, just a shout out to Becky Colby, who writes, Nick, yours is my favorite YouTube channel, hands down. I love how you tie together cases that seemingly have little or nothing to do with each other. I find myself looking for intertextuality. It's so wonderful to see some of our followers and fans using that word. She says, I find myself looking for intertextuality in everything now and thinking more critically about things than I used to. In other words, intertextuality is really about pattern recognition, and we're about to do that with the Pride of Miss Jean Brodie. Happy holidays to you and yours. Please keep doing what you're doing. Thanks so much, Becky Colby, for that. Happy holidays to you as well. If you have not hit the thanks button, please do so. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the subscribe button, and let's get started. How good are you at recognizing intertextualities?
Well, what about you, Mary? You don't look to me like a girl who ties knots.
No, Miss Brodie, but my brother does.
Petrification. Petrification. I do not intend to devote my prime to petrification. Prop up your books in case of intruders. If there are intruders, we are doing our history.
And think about that accented reference alone that comes up repeatedly in the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, the creme de la creme, and the accents in attaché and JonBenet. It's the same pretentiousness, isn't it?
Safety first. But safety does not come first. Goodness, truth, and beauty come first.
And what's just happened before that is Miss Brodie has placed a picture above another picture on the wall.
How do you know they're 12 years old? From the handwriting, the vocabulary, the rudimentary knowledge of the facts of life. Surely you cannot believe that that is the work of 9-year-olds.
Now, if the purpose of that narrative was to imbue the reader with lessons in humility, warnings of hypocrisy, or the dangers of hubris and manipulation, Patsy seemed to be charmed by them instead, caught up in her own delusions of grandeur instead. But I digress. The housekeeper also saw other things. Let's get back to what the housekeeper saw, the patterns that she recognized. She writes, "You were still wearing the red sweater and black velvet trousers when you put JonBenet to bed Christmas night. Surprisingly, for someone who has 100 dresses and prides herself with never wearing the same outfit twice, you were wearing that same costume when the police arrived the next day." And I have to say, over the years covering this case, one of the aspects that has surprised me most has been how dismissive people have been of this. So what that Patsy put on the same clothes? I do. But you are not Patsy Ramsey. And I think what this shows is that you don't know Patsy Ramsey like the housekeeper did. Also, if you're the sort of person who would put the same clothes on, and I'm one of those people, it means you don't understand what kind of pretentious, appearance-conscious person Patsy Ramsey was. And it also, as I say, shows that you just don't know Patsy very well, like the housekeeper knows her. And besides appearances and what she wore and all that sort of thing, the housekeeper was also familiar with how Patsy was feeling in the days running up to Christmas. According to the housekeeper, Patsy seemed weary as that Christmas of 1996 drew near, weary and worn out. She writes, "So you were weary that night, and who wouldn't be?" She's basically saying, anyone would be weary under the same situation. And she adds, "John was no help. He did what he always did, swallowed a couple of melatonin capsules and fell into a deep sleep. He wouldn't have heard a cannon go off if it was next to him." And it's interesting, in one of the documentaries, I think it's from Dateline, when John is asked about the bedwetting, he seems to be completely unaware of it.
I don't know that she wet her bed much. I don't even remember that.
Well, she had...
Sorry, that is actually from 58 minutes into JonBenet's America. But from John Ramsey's own words, one kind of gets the sense that Patsy is fully responsible for her 2 children, which is not something that is unusual, where you have a businessman, a CEO in this case, who is, and one would expect to be, very engrossed in his business, and the stay-at-home mom is basically in charge of affairs at home. That was certainly something that we knew very well in the 90s. But the point is, I think the housekeeper is right when she says John was no help. And this is no impinging on John. It's simply that what she's saying is accurate, that Patsy as the housewife and the mother in this situation would be weary with these young children in her care, and also with the whole Christmas thing going on. But the housekeeper also saw something that seems taboo to talk or even think about, and that is Patsy's little darling driving her to distraction. She writes, "Holidays can be depressing. I don't blame you for being down. Your big 4-0 birthday was less than a week away." Now, that's another thing that a beauty queen would weigh more heavily on a beauty queen, that milestone, than most other people. Also, she talks about you dealt with ovarian cancer for years and your beauty queen looks were fading. That's another thing the housekeeper notices. Miss West Virginia of 1977 had become a middle-aged matron. You loved JonBenet, but she was a handful, wetting the bed night after night. She was driving you crazy. And if you think that's harsh, in the Ramsey's own book, they admit that one of the last things that happened between Patsy and JonBenet before the party with the whites was that JonBenet wouldn't wear the outfit that Patsy wanted her to wear. And so wasn't that an example of something that was driving Patsy crazy? Wasn't that an example of JonBenet being a handful?
You see much, too much.
JonBenet wet the bed again that night, didn't she? She woke up and told you about it before you were even undressed, and you simply lost it. You took her into the bathroom, which was the same destination you always took JonBenet when it was time to punish her for bedwetting. You forget that I saw you take her there so many times before, shutting the door tightly before you, so her screams could not be heard. And then she goes on to sort of elaborate about a particular scenario, which I don't believe and I don't agree with, but it is very interesting, this other aspect, because it seems to reveal, if we can rely on what the housekeeper is saying, another side to Patsy, even another side to JonBenet. And it's here where the housekeeper elaborates on her scenario, where I would be careful taking everything the Ramsey housekeeper says as gospel, as I suspect Detective Steve Thomas did. It's easy enough to do. And I suspect precisely this statement from the housekeeper became the detective's aha moment, as it has become for, I think, some of you guys out there. But housekeepers aren't detectives, and detectives should know better. The housekeeper mistakenly writes, for example, that JonBenet's wrists were taped and that the duct tape was cut from Burke's knife. She presumes by Patsy. She writes, "You kept trying to make it an exotic crime scene, didn't you? You even taped your daughter's wrists and her mouth shut, cutting the tape with a small Swiss Army knife that would later be found beside her body the next day. I remember that knife. Burke had walked around the house whittling with it a month before, and I told you I put it up at the top of the linen closet near JonBenet's bedroom when I confiscated it from him." The housekeeper sees a great deal, but she's unable to interpret all of it, and her intimate knowledge of Patsy clouds her perspective on everyone else. Does she get some of those interpretations right? I believe so. The handwriting, yes. The dozens of handwritten notes, certainly. But there comes a point where, as close as the housekeeper was to Patsy, she missed something, or perhaps she was too close to see the woods for the trees. Another area that's also taboo is brought up in a tabloid article discussing the housekeeper's testimony to the grand jury. This. And we really want to highlight an excerpt out of that article. They questioned me heavily about their marriage and asked whether I knew Patsy was having an affair. I was forced to relive those months before JonBenet died, when Patsy would get dolled up every morning and tell me where she was going, looking as if she'd stepped out of a store fashion display window. She'd say, "Linda, I'm going out for the day," and she actually looked happy. When John would call and ask me where she was, I never knew what to tell him. He'd always sound annoyed that she wasn't there, and especially when she didn't tell me where she had gone. This is something the housekeeper repeats in her own account as well. Later, when appearing before the Boulder grand jury investigating the murder of JonBenet Ramsey, I spoke at length about the trouble I thought the Ramsey marriage was experiencing. I told the grand jury that, in my opinion, based on my personal observations while working for them, I could honestly say that the Ramseys did not appear to be a happily married couple. On the contrary, they seemed held together like a lot of other unhappy marriages by their children. Without their son Burke and their daughter JonBenet, it's my belief that John and Patsy would have divorced many years ago. Now, for my part, I am less interested in this idea of infidelity than I am in the notion of neglect. I don't really want to speculate either way, whether one or the other or both of them were cheating on one another. I think it's interesting that the Housekeeper brings this up, but in the context of a tabloid, I'm not really sure I agree with it. I don't think she even brings it up in a book, though. So, and the book is unpublished. But if you come back to this notion of neglect, and, one of the indictments doesn't specifically use that word, but it seems to be inferred. This idea that there seemed to be a lack of care in a certain way, a lack of taking reasonable precautions in a certain sense, just as we see right now in the Anna Kepner case. And in that case, it's a case of, should you allow two people to sleep in the same bedroom? And that can happen when there is family instability due to a range of reasons, anything from one parent being caught up in work, as John was, or because there's a blended family situation or serious illness, etc. So you see, you don't need infidelity for there to be neglect. But if there was infidelity, neglect of some sort would be virtually automatic in some sense. We don't know for sure that when Patsy went off by herself, if she did, it wasn't to meet a seamstress or someone that had something to do with the pageants or the photo shoot or even art classes. It's enough, in my opinion, to simply raise the issue about whether it was a happy marriage or not. That would be how JonBenet would have experienced her mother and her father. And if it wasn't a happy marriage, one can imagine a dimension in the children for both JonBenet and Burke that we may have missed or underestimated. And when we see the Ramseys in their countless interviews, both defending themselves, both arguing their respective cases, do they seem to do so as individuals or as a loving couple? And that's the value, I think, of the Housekeeper to us and the grand jury, because I think it makes one think in areas like that with penetrating perspective, where these areas were previously entirely off limits or else entirely unknown to us. Does that make sense? Well, I'm not going to take it further than that. I hope you found this little rabbit hole that we've gone into in terms of the Housekeeper interesting and worthwhile. As I've said, the Housekeeper is not technically a peripheral figure, although over time I think she's sort of been relegated to being one. But from here on out, we'll resume our series on truly peripheral figures. So look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.